The North Atlantic didn't forgive mistakes. Lieutenant Commander James Harwell knew this the moment HMS Pembroke cut through the black water at 0400 hours, 40 nautical miles off the coast of occupied Norway. February 1943. The convoy ahead had been scattered by U-boats 3 days prior, and now the destroyer was hunting ghosts, metallic phantoms that lay dormant beneath the waves, waiting for a hull to kiss their trigger mechanisms. Harwell stood on the bridge, hands gripping the rail, eyes scanning the horizon where fog met ocean in a seamless curtain of gray. The wind carried salt and diesel fumes. Behind him, the radar operator's voice crackled through the intercom, monotone and tired. "Nothing on scope, sir. Clear for 2 miles." "Keep watching," Harwell replied, his voice low but firm. Beside him, Lieutenant Robert Finch, young, eager, barely 24, shifted his weight nervously. "Sir, if there are mines in these waters, shouldn't we have swept them before the convoy passed?" Harwell didn't look at him. "The convoy didn't have a choice." "Neither do we." Below deck, in the cramped forward hold where the smell of oil and sweat clung to every surface, 3 men worked in silence. Petty Officer Samuel Croft was one of them, 31 years old, a fisherman before the war, hands rough as barnacles. He'd been assigned to the salvage team because he didn't panic easily and because he knew how to tie knots that held under pressure. The other 2 were younger. Seaman First Class David Kemp, rail-thin and jittery, and able seaman Thomas Briggs, stocky and quiet, the kind of man who spoke only when necessary. They were sorting through debris from a German E-boat that had been sunk 2 weeks earlier, fragments of wood, twisted metal, waterlogged maps. The Admiralty wanted anything useful, code books, charts, equipment, anything that might give the Allies an edge. Croft lifted a corroded steel panel and tossed it aside. It clanged against the bulkhead, echoing through the hold. Kemp flinched. "Easy," Briggs muttered. "Relax," Croft said, wiping his hands on his trousers. "If there was anything explosive in here, we'd already be paced." Kemp didn't laugh. They continued digging through the wreckage, soaked canvas, shattered instrument panels, a sailor's cap with a swastika stitched on the side. Croft tossed it into the discard pile without a second glance. Then Briggs stopped. "What's this?" He was crouched near the far corner of the hold, one hand holding a flashlight, the other pulling something from beneath a collapsed storage locker. It was small, rectangular, wrapped in oilcloth. The fabric was heavy, military-grade, tied with twine that had somehow survived the salt and the sinking. Croft moved closer, shining his own light on the object. "Open it." Briggs hesitated, then untied the twine carefully. The oilcloth fell away, revealing a leather-bound notebook, black, worn, water-stained but intact. The cover bore no markings, no insignia. Just blank leather. Kemp leaned in. "What is it?" Briggs opened the first page. The handwriting was precise, methodical, German script, dense and angular. But it wasn't text that filled the pages. It was diagrams. Technical schematics. Cross-sections of cylindrical devices with labels in German. Zunder, Sprengladung, Druckschalter. Croft's breath caught. "Mines," he whispered. Briggs turned the page. More diagrams. Different types, contact mines, magnetic mines, acoustic mines. Each one meticulously drawn, annotated with measurements, depths, trigger mechanisms. There were tables listing deployment zones, coordinates along the Norwegian coast, the Skagerrak, the English Channel. Kemp stared, his face pale. This is everything." "This is forbidden," Croft said quietly, his voice tight. "We're not supposed to have this." "Why not?" Kemp asked. "It's intelligence. We should take it to the captain." "Because," Croft said, looking at the notebook like it was a loaded gun, "if the Jerrys know we have this, they'll change everything. New mines. New placements. And if we know we have this, someone up the chain will bury it or hand it to the brass who'll sit on it for months. Briggs closed the notebook slowly. So what do we do? Croft met his eyes. The hold was silent except for the low hum of the engines and the creak of the hull against the waves. We keep it quiet, Croft said. For now. Above them, on the bridge, Harwell was staring at the radar screen when the operator's voice broke the silence. Contact, sir. Bearing 270. Range 3,000 yards. Harwell's hand moved instinctively to the intercom. All hands, action stations. Prepare depth charges. The alarm sounded, a shrill mechanical scream that echoed through every compartment of the ship. Men ran to their posts, boots pounding on steel. In the forward hold, Croft shoved the notebook into his jacket and zipped it shut. Move, he hissed. They scrambled toward the ladder as the ship heeled sharply to port, engines roaring. Above them, the first depth charge was already being rolled into position. Somewhere beneath the surface, something was waiting. The depth charge hit the water with a muffled thump, disappearing into the black expanse. Harwell counted in his head, 1, 2, 3, and then the ocean erupted. A column of white water shot upward, 50 feet high, the shock wave rippling outward in concentric rings. The Pembroke shuddered, her hull groaning as the force traveled through the steel. Men gripped railings, consoles, anything bolted down. Reload. Harwell barked. Fire pattern Delta. 2 more charges went over the stern, spaced 20 seconds apart. The sea convulsed again, and this time something darker rose to the surface, oil, thick and black, spreading like a wound. Finch leaned over the rail, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Got him, sir. Oil slick confirmed. U-boat kill. Harwell didn't smile. He'd seen too many false positives, too many oil slicks that turned out to be decoys or damaged seals. Maintain course. Keep pinging. The sonar operator's voice crackled again. No secondary contact, sir. She's either dead or deep. Deep, Harwell muttered. Always deep. Below, in the forward hold, Croft pressed his back against the bulkhead, the notebook still pressed against his chest beneath his jacket. The explosions had rattled the ship hard enough to knock loose tools and spare parts, sending them clattering across the deck. Kemp was braced in the corner, hands over his ears. Briggs stood beside Croft, breathing hard. "We need to get rid of it," Kemp said, his voice shaking. "If the captain finds out we're holding on to something like that." "He won't," Croft said flatly. "Not unless you tell him." "I'm not going to tell him." "But what if someone searches us? What if—" "Shut it," Briggs snapped. "You're spiraling." Kemp clenched his jaw but said nothing. Croft pulled the notebook from his jacket and opened it again, angling it toward the dim overhead light. He couldn't read German fluently, but the diagrams spoke a universal language. One page showed a mine with a magnetic trigger, the kind that detonated when a ship's metal hull passed overhead. Another showed an acoustic model, sensitive to the sound of propellers. There were notes in the margins, handwritten observations. One entry caught his eye. Einsatz, Englischer Kanal, Sector 7, Tief 40 meter. English Channel. Sector 7. Depth, 40 meters. He flipped through more pages. Coordinates. Dozens of them. Some marked with small crosses, others circled in red ink. This wasn't just a technical manual. It was a deployment log. A map of where the mines had been laid. "Christ," Croft whispered. "This isn't just blueprints. It's a bloody minefield guide." Briggs leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. "If this is accurate, we could clear half the Atlantic." "Or blow ourselves up trying," Kemp added, still pale. Croft closed the notebook and looked at both of them. "Listen to me. We take this to the captain, it goes up the chain. Admiralty, intelligence, God knows who else. It'll take weeks, maybe months before anyone does anything with it. And in the meantime, ships keep hitting mines. So what are you saying? Briggs asked. I'm saying we use it ourselves, Croft said. Tonight. We cross-reference these coordinates with our charts. If there's a minefield where we're headed, we warn Harwell without telling him how we know. Kemp shook his head. That's insane. He'll ask questions. Let him ask, Croft said. I'd rather answer questions than drown. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the engines and the faint creak of the hull. Finally, Briggs nodded. All right. But if this goes sideways, I'm saying it was your idea. Croft allowed himself a thin smile. Deal. 6 hours later. 2,200 hours. The officers' mess was cramped and dimly lit, smelling of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Harwell sat at the small table, reviewing reconnaissance reports, a half-empty mug beside him. Finch entered quietly, clipboard in hand. Sir, the salvage team wants to see you. Harwell didn't look up. Tell them to file a report in the morning. They said it's urgent. Harwell sighed, setting down his pen. Fine. Send them in. Croft entered first, followed by Briggs. Kemp stayed outside, pacing nervously in the corridor. Harwell gestured to the chairs across from him, but neither man sat. Well? Harwell asked. Croft glanced at Briggs, then pulled a folded chart from his jacket. Not the notebook, just a standard-issue navigation map with 3 small marks penciled in red. Sir, we've been reviewing debris from the E-boat wreck, Croft said carefully. Found some navigational notes. German. Most of it's rubbish, but there were coordinates marked. Cross-referenced them with our route. Harwell leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And 2 of them match sectors were scheduled to pass through in the next 12 hours, Croft said. Could be convoy routes. Could be patrol zones. Or minefields, Harwell finished, his voice flat. Croft said nothing. Harwell took the chart, studying the marks. You're telling me you found enemy mine coordinates on a sunken E-boat? Possible coordinates, sir, Briggs added quickly. Could be old. Could be wrong. Harwell looked at them both for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Where's the source material? Destroyed in the salvage process, sir, Croft lied smoothly. Water damage. This is all we could pull. Harwell's jaw tightened. He didn't believe them, not entirely, but he also didn't have time to interrogate 2 petty officers over paperwork. All right, he said finally. I'll adjust course. We'll swing north, add 2 hours to the route. If you're wrong, you're both on extra watch for a month. Understood, sir, Croft said. Dismissed. They left quickly, moving back down the corridor toward the hold. Kemp was still there, chewing his nails. Well? He asked. He bought it, Briggs said. For now. Croft exhaled slowly, the notebook still heavy against his ribs. Then we keep our heads down. No more risks. Not tonight. But deep in the cold water below, something was already moving. The mine they'd avoided by 30 meters had neighbors, and one of them was drifting. The mine had been in the water for 7 months. It hung suspended in the dark, 15 meters below the surface, tethered to the seafloor by a rusted anchor chain. The casing was cylindrical, painted black, covered in barnacles and algae. Inside, 300 kilograms of high explosives sat dormant, waiting for a trigger that might never come. But the chain was corroding. 2 links near the top had weakened over months of salt erosion and tidal stress. The mine swayed gently with the current, pulling against its mooring. At 0315 hours, the weakest link snapped. The mine began to drift. It rose slowly, buoyancy carrying it upward through the thermocline. No lights marked its passage. No sound. Just a silent ascent through black water, following the current westward, directly into the path of HMS Pembroke. On the bridge, Harwell was reviewing the adjusted course when the lookout's voice cracked through the intercom. Object in the water. Starboard bow. 200 yards. Harwell's head snapped up. What kind of object? Can't tell, sir. Dark. Floating. Could be wreckage. Finch grabbed the binoculars, scanning the water. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making visibility almost zero. I don't see. Wait. There. Something just below the surface. Harwell moved to the rail, squinting into the darkness. Range. 150 yards. Closing. All engines stop, Harwell ordered, his voice sharp. Now. The engine room responded immediately. The Pembroke's turbines wound down, the ship's forward momentum bleeding off. But a destroyer didn't stop on a dime. They were still moving, still coasting toward whatever was out there. Range. Harwell demanded. 100 yards. Searchlight. Put a beam on it. The deck-mounted spotlight flared to life, a brilliant column of white cutting through the night. The beam swept across the water, catching foam and spray, and then there. A black sphere. Drifting. Horns protruding from its surface like the spines of a sea urchin. Finch's voice was barely a whisper. Mine. Hard to port. Harwell shouted. Full reverse. The helmsman spun the wheel. The engines roared into reverse. The ship heeled sharply, men grabbing railings and consoles to keep from falling. The mine continued drifting closer, bobbing in the swell, 50 yards now, then 40. Below deck, Croft felt the sudden lurch and knew immediately something was wrong. He grabbed the notebook, shoved it into a waterproof pouch he'd stolen from the medical supplies, and stuffed it into his jacket. What's happening? Kemp asked, panic rising in his voice. Stay calm, Briggs said, but his own face was tight. The ship groaned as the engines strained. The mine was 30 yards away. 20. The spotlight held it in stark relief, barnacled, ancient, deadly. Come on, Harwell muttered under his breath. Come on. The Pembroke's bow began to swing, the stern kicking outward. The water churned white as the propellers reversed at maximum power. The mine drifted past the starboard side, 10 yards clear, then 15. They were going to make it. And then the stern swung into it. The contact was gentle, just a glancing touch, metal on metal. One of the protruding horns struck the ship's hull with a soft clang, no harder than a hammer tap. But that was enough. The trigger mechanism inside the horn shattered. A glass vial of acid broke, releasing its contents onto a lead plate. The chemical reaction took 3 seconds. Then the detonator fired. The explosion was a physical force, not a sound. It hit like a fist made of pressure and light. The stern of the Pembroke lifted out of the water, the entire aft section crumpling inward as 300 kilograms of explosive ripped through steel and flesh. Fire bloomed orange and white, and then black smoke poured into the sky. The ship's lights went dark. Emergency klaxons screamed. Men were thrown across compartments, slammed into bulkheads, crushed by shifting equipment. In the forward hold, Croft was hurled against the far wall, his shoulder slamming into steel. Kemp screamed, pinned under a fallen storage crate. Briggs lay motionless, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The ship listed hard to starboard, taking on water fast. The deck tilted at a 15-degree angle, then 20. Tools and debris slid across the floor, crashing into walls and men. Croft pushed himself up, pain shooting through his ribs. Briggs! Kemp! Kemp was sobbing, trapped beneath the crate. Croft stumbled over, grabbed the edge, and heaved. The crate shifted just enough for Kemp to wriggle free, gasping. "Can you move?" Croft demanded. Yeah, I think so." Croft turned to Briggs. The man's eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Blood pooled beneath his head. "Briggs," Croft said, shaking him. "Briggs, come on." No response. Croft pressed 2 fingers against Briggs' neck, feeling for a pulse. Weak. Thready. But there. "He's alive," Croft said. "Help me get him up." They dragged Briggs toward the ladder as the ship continued to list. Water was already seeping through cracks in the bulkhead, cold and black. The emergency lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness. Above them, Harwell was shouting orders through the chaos. "Damage report. Get me a damage report." "Aft compartments flooding, sir," someone yelled. "Engine rooms gone. No power. Launch the boats. All hands abandon ship." The Pembroke was dying. Slowly, inexorably, she was sinking into the North Atlantic. The mine had ripped open her stern, shattered her keel, and now the ocean was claiming her. Croft reached the ladder and started climbing, Kemp right behind him, dragging Briggs by the arms. The angle of the deck made every step a struggle. Men were running past them, scrambling toward the lifeboats, slipping on oil and blood. They reached the main deck just as the first lifeboat hit the water. The sea was already lapping over the stern rail, cold and black and patient. Harwell stood near the bridge, refusing to leave until the last man was off. He saw Croft emerge from the hold, saw the blood on his jacket, the unconscious man between him and Kemp. "Get him in a boat," Harwell ordered. "Now." They stumbled toward the nearest lifeboat, a small wooden vessel already overloaded with men. Hands reached out, pulling Briggs aboard, then Kemp, then Croft. The boat was lowered jerkily, ropes groaning, and hit the water with a slap. Croft looked back at the Pembroke. She was listing 40 degrees now, her bow rising out of the water, propellers exposed and dripping. Men were still jumping from the deck, splashing into the freezing ocean. And then, with a low, mournful groan, the ship's back broke. The stern section tore away, sinking immediately in a boil of white foam. The bow lingered for a moment longer, pointing toward the sky like a monument, and then it too slipped beneath the surface. Gone. 53 men had been aboard HMS Pembroke. 38 made it into lifeboats. 15 didn't. Croft sat in the rocking lifeboat, shivering, one hand pressed against his jacket where the notebook was still tucked safely inside. He could feel the weight of it, the weight of what he knew, and the weight of what he hadn't said. Dawn came slowly, gray and indifferent. The lifeboats drifted in a loose cluster, rising and falling with the swells. The men inside were silent, some from shock, others from exhaustion, a few from injuries that would kill them before rescue arrived. The ocean didn't care. It stretched in every direction, empty and cold. Croft sat near the bow of the lead boat, wrapped in a wool blanket someone had pulled from the emergency supplies. His shoulder throbbed. His ribs ached with every breath. Beside him, Kemp huddled with his knees drawn to his chest, staring at nothing. Briggs was in the center of the boat, laid flat, unconscious but breathing. A medic, a kid named Larson, barely 20, was pressing a bandage against the gash on Briggs' head, trying to stop the bleeding. "He's lost a lot of blood," Larson said quietly. "I don't know if he'll make it to pickup." "He'll make it," Croft said, though he didn't believe it. In the boat behind them, Harwell sat rigid and upright, his uniform soaked through, face pale but composed. He'd been the last man off the Pembroke, jumping just before the bow went under. Finch sat beside him, shivering violently despite the blanket around his shoulders. "How long until rescue?" Finch asked, his voice shaking. 4 hours, Harwell said. "Maybe 6. Depends on the patrol schedule." "And if they don't find us?" Harwell didn't answer. The first hour passed in silence. The second hour, Briggs woke up. He groaned, tried to sit up, and immediately vomited over the side of the boat. Croft helped him lean back down. "Easy," Croft said. "You took a bad hit." Briggs blinked, disoriented. What happened?" "Mine," Croft said. "Hit the stern. Ship's gone." Briggs closed his eyes, processing. Then his hand moved to his jacket, patting the pockets, searching. His eyes snapped open. "Where is it?" Croft didn't need to ask what he meant. He tapped his own jacket. "Safe." Briggs exhaled slowly. "Good. Don't lose it." Across the boat, Kemp was watching them, his expression unreadable. He'd been quiet since they'd abandoned ship, hadn't said a word to anyone. Now he leaned forward, voice low enough that the others couldn't hear. "We should have told him," Kemp said. "We should have told the captain about the notebook before we changed course. Maybe we could have avoided the mine altogether." Croft's jaw tightened. "We didn't know where the mine was. The notebook didn't have that marked." "But it had other coordinates," Kemp pressed. "We only gave him 3. What if we'd given him everything?" "What if?" "What if doesn't matter now," Croft snapped. "The ship's sunk. 15 men are dead. We did what we thought was right. Did we?" Kemp's voice cracked. "Or did we just make it worse?" Briggs coughed, his voice weak but steady. "We saved 38. Could have been 0 if we'd hit the first minefield." Kemp looked away, hands trembling. Croft felt the weight of the notebook pressing against his chest, heavier now than it had been before. He thought about the diagrams inside, the coordinates, the technical details that could save hundreds of ships, or condemn them if the information was wrong, outdated, or incomplete. He thought about the 15 men who hadn't made it off the Pembroke. Their names. Their faces. The ones who'd been in the engine room when the mine hit, crushed instantly by the blast. The ones who'd jumped into the water and never surfaced. Did I kill them? He wondered. Or did I save the others? There was no way to know. 4 hours later. The destroyer HMS Valiant arrived at 1,100 hours, her silhouette breaking the horizon like a ghost. The lifeboats were spotted within minutes, and rescue lines were thrown down. Men climbed aboard on shaking legs, collapsing on the deck, wrapped in blankets and given hot tea. Croft was among the last to board. He helped Briggs up the rope ladder, then climbed himself, every muscle screaming in protest. When he reached the deck, a medical officer immediately grabbed him. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine," Croft lied. "Check him." He pointed to Briggs, who was being laid on a stretcher. Harwell was already on the bridge, speaking with the Valiant's captain, a grizzled man named Winters, 50 years old and stone-faced. Croft could see them through the window, Harwell gesturing, Winters listening, occasionally nodding. After 20 minutes, Harwell descended to the main deck and called out, "Petty Officer Croft." A word. Croft's stomach tightened. He walked over, trying to keep his face neutral. Harwell studied him for a long moment. "You told me you found German coordinates on debris from the E-boat wreck." "Yes, sir." "And you said the source material was destroyed." "Yes, sir." Harwell's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." Croft said nothing. Harwell stepped closer, voice low enough that no one else could hear. "I don't know what you found, Croft. And frankly, I don't care. But if you're holding on to intelligence, real intelligence, then it needs to go up the chain. Not in your pocket. Not in some bloody notebook you're too afraid to hand over." Croft's breath caught. "He knows." "Sir, I don't want excuses," Harwell interrupted. "I want the truth. Did you find something on that E-boat that could have prevented what happened to the Pembroke?" Croft hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the waterproof pouch. He handed it to Harwell without a word. Harwell opened it, pulled out the notebook, and flipped through the first few pages. His expression didn't change, but his grip tightened on the leather cover. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. He closed the notebook, looked at Croft. "Why didn't you give me this immediately?" "I didn't trust the system, sir," Croft said quietly. "I thought if I handed it over, it'd disappear into some office in London and never be used. I thought I could do more with it myself." Harwell's face darkened. "And how did that work out?" Croft had no answer. Harwell exhaled slowly, then tucked the notebook into his own jacket. "You're not wrong about the system. But you're wrong to think you're smarter than it." He paused. "I'll make sure this gets to the right people. People who'll actually use it. But you," he pointed at Croft, "you're going to write a full report. Every detail. Every coordinate. Every diagram. And then you're going to pray that Admiralty doesn't court-martial you for withholding intelligence." "Yes, sir." Harwell turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Croft, you probably did save lives. Maybe not the ones on the Pembroke. But somewhere out there, some convoy's going to avoid a minefield because of what you found." He walked away, leaving Croft standing alone on the deck. 3 weeks later. Admiralty Intelligence Office, London. The notebook was opened on a heavy oak table, surrounded by naval officers, intelligence analysts, and mine disposal experts. They'd been poring over it for hours, cross-referencing coordinates, verifying diagrams, checking deployment patterns against known sinkings. A commander named Whitmore leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This is extraordinary. The level of detail is unprecedented. If even half of these coordinates are accurate, we can clear entire sectors." Another officer, younger, shook his head. "But at what cost? The Germans will know we have it. They'll change everything." "They already suspect," Whitmore said. "The E-boat that carried this went down weeks ago. If they haven't changed protocols by now, they're not going to." A third officer tapped one of the diagrams. "This acoustic mine here, the one triggered by propeller noise. We've been losing ships to these for months. If we can replicate the trigger mechanism, we can develop countermeasures." Whitmore nodded. "Get it to the engineers. And get the coordinates to Coastal Command. I want every marked sector swept by the end of the month." The notebook was carefully closed, sealed in a leather case, and locked in a safe. 3 months later, minesweepers using the information from the forbidden notebook cleared 127 German mines from the North Atlantic and English Channel. It's estimated that the intelligence saved between 40 and 60 Allied ships, thousands of lives. Petty Officer Samuel Croft was not court-martialed. He received a reprimand for failing to report intelligence immediately, but also a commendation for initiative and bravery. He never spoke about the notebook again. But late at night, when the fog rolled in and the ocean turned gray, he thought about the 15 men who didn't make it off the Pembroke. He thought about the choices he'd made, the information he'd held, the lives he'd saved and the ones he couldn't. And he wondered, as all soldiers do, whether he'd done the right thing. The answer, like the ocean, remained uncertain.